Vintage JBL presents Nipper in No Good Case Goes Unpunished.
Hello everyone, John here with Vintage JBL, and today I have a different type of restoration. This is a case from a 2245 or 2270 or a couple other ones from Marantz that were made in the 70s. And this is a walnut veneered case that over time I've had them come in where there's chunks taken out of them or they're heavily scratched. This one wasn't too bad. Just the corner there I needed to put some quick wood on, something really hard enough to hold that metal screen in. And now I'm going to do some touch-ups with the wood filler, which is basically Bondo. So after making some minor repairs, I'm going to start out the sanding process with some 180 and sand the entire case down, and that'll take care of anything that I patched up with that wood filler. And this gets it ready for the veneer, so the veneer has something to grab onto. After sanding the cabinet, what I do is clean it off, and I use a vacuum, tack cloth, and usually wipe it down with some denatured alcohol. So that makes sure that the surface is sound enough for the veneer to stick to. And here's a piece of veneer. These are scraps, so I'm not doing a connecting grain pattern or waterfall effect on the cabinet. I am just using scraps, and if you look at an original case, they didn't do that either. In fact, they never did that on the speakers, but if I have enough veneer where I can do that, I'll do a case that is completely waterfall connected with the grain all the way, wrapping all the way around, but in this case, I'm not. And it looks pretty good. And I had two pieces that were peel and stick that I put on the sides first, but the top I didn't have a piece that was big enough with that grain pattern to go horizontally, so I had to find a piece that I'd cut from a previous speaker restoration that I had to put contact cement on, and you'll see that in a second. But all the veneer matches, it's all walnut, and it turned out pretty good, and you'll see that at the end. I'm using a razor knife to cut off all the excess, and it's best to put the sides on first and then put the top on, just like with speakers. You want to do the sides first and then do the top and bottom. But on this, it's just the top I have to worry about, so everything will connect perfectly when you put the sides on first. Then the top piece of veneer will lay over those seams, and it just looks a lot better. Before sanding, what you see me doing with that veneer scraper on the edges was I was deburring that wood so it flattens and smooths it over, so it is not the transition would look a little more seamless when I put the next piece on. It's almost impossible to avoid that seam, but when you deburr it and sand it, that transition is just going to look so much better and more natural. Now I'm applying contact cement to the top. That's only because I didn't have a peel and stick that was wide enough to do this surface, and I mentioned that before, but it blends in pretty nice. And this is that piece of walnut veneer that I'm putting contact cement on. And before I apply it, I let it dry for about 20 minutes, apply a second coat, and then I put it on. So since I'm not doing a connecting grain pattern or the waterfall effect, I just have an oversized piece of veneer, and it doesn't matter as long as I stick it on and the grain is running horizontally. I'll cut off all the ends and it'll all blend in at the end. What I'm using here is that veneer scraper. It's a homemade veneer scraper. If you watched any of my other videos, you see me using that on speaker cabinets, and it's a much better method than using one of those rollers. But the roller does have its purpose, and usually what I use a roller for is to identify if there's any air bubbles after I apply the veneer. So I turn this over and I cut off all the excess for the opening for the metal grill grid that goes in there. And I just use scissors to cut off most of it. And at the very end, I'll just cut the rest off with a razor knife. And I get it as close to the edge as possible and get it ready for routing. You can see they put a real piece of walnut around this front edge. So I leave that alone. I don't do any veneering to it. You could sand that down and try and get it as smooth as possible. And I just sanded the flat part that goes around the face of the cabinet. You can get a lot more detailed on it if you want. In the past, I've cut the excess off of the opening on the top where the metal grill goes with a razor knife. And yes, it can be done, but it is a pain in the neck. So if you do have a trim router with a pattern bit or a flush trim bit, this is the way to go. The transition is going to be a lot smoother, and all you'll need to do is lightly sand the edge down and it's done. Now that the veneer is all done and cut, this is the beginning stage of the final finishing. I am going to hand sand the entire cabinet down with 220 grit and get it ready for finishing and or sanding sealer. And in this case, and I think in every case after this, I'm going to go the sanding sealer method if I'm just going to put a clear or oil finish over. So I smooth it down as much as possible with 220. And that's just going to get the light scratches out from any orbital sanding I've done or anything I may have missed that my eye's not picking up. And I just go around the whole thing, give it a visual, and make sure it's ready for the sanding sealer. I've been using sanding sealers for years, and for some reason I stopped using them, and I would put maybe finishes on, what I thought was really well sanded wood and that it wouldn't matter. But the advantage of sanding sealer is that it penetrates the wood, it raises the fibers, so then what you do is sand it down after and it seals everything in, so you're not going to have any very fine fibers sticking out, grabbing onto maybe the applicators that you use and get a bunch of fuzz marks or lint trapped inside the grain. So sanding sealer is the way to go. It smooths everything out. I'm doing a pan around and you could see how smooth it is. And after it dries, and I'm using water based, so it dries in about an hour. You could sand it. I use 400 grit. If you want to get even finer finish, go up to 600. I seem to never have 600 on hand every time I do one of these videos, so 400 works. It just would be better if you use 600. And you just sand down the whole cabinet, and you sand with the grain pattern and clean it up. And you want to clean it with a vacuum and a tack cloth. You don't need to use alcohol or any kind of liquids after that process or after you put the sanding sealer on. Just make sure you vacuum it really good and tack it down with a tack cloth, and it's ready for your finish. Over the years, I've always read and I always hear people say that JBL and Marantz is a match made in heaven, and I'm going to agree. These two brands are just simply made for each other. So I just thought that it was appropriate to use the JBL oil finish that I made, and you could see that how I made it in another video. And it's simple to make. It'll cost you about $9. Now my camera cut out on me and I'm putting the second coat on. What you want to do is let that first coat dry for about 10 minutes, wipe it down, and then you could put a second coat on maybe about 8 hours later or a day later. And I waited about 4 hours and I put the second coat on, and it just comes out absolutely beautiful. I'm not sure if the camera's picking this up or not, but it is super smooth. It feels nice. It looks nice. It's probably one of the best veneer jobs I did on a case to date. I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe That is important. Hit that subscribe button right now. Until the next video, thank you for watching VintageJBL.com.